Remember that the sudden flash of blue and red in your rearview mirror is designed to trigger an immediate physiological response, a surge of adrenaline that can cloud your judgment just when you need it most. As we move through the heart of April and the spring air begins to warm the pavement, more drivers are taking to the roads for weekend trips or simply enjoying the late afternoon sunlight that lingers longer each day after a cold winter. This seasonal increase in traffic often leads to a higher frequency of roadside interactions. And while the sight of those lights can feel like a personal confrontation, it is vital to view it through the lens of a standard procedure rather than a personal attack. Your heart might race and your palms might sweat, but the first step to navigating this situation successfully is to manage your own nervous system before the officer even reaches your window. The sound of a gentle spring shower on your roof or the scent of blooming trees nearby can serve as a grounding point, a reminder that you are a person with rights and responsibilities, standing in a moment of time that will eventually pass. Pulling over safely and promptly is your first communication with the officer, signaling that you are observant and compliant with the immediate directive to halt, which sets a professional tone for the encounter. When you see those lights, do not react with a sudden jerk of the wheel or a slam of the brakes. Instead, activate your turn signal to acknowledge the officer's presence and look for a wide shoulder or a well-lit parking lot where the interaction can take place away from the flow of traffic. This initial phase is about stabilization, both of the vehicle and of your internal state, because a calm driver is much less likely to inadvertently escalate a situation through nervous movements or aggressive posture. The feeling of being watched as the officer runs your plates and sits in their cruiser for those first few minutes can be agonizing, often leading to a spiral of what-if scenarios in your mind. You might find yourself checking your mirrors repeatedly or reaching for your glove box prematurely, but these actions can be misinterpreted as reaching for a weapon or attempting to hide contraband. It is much more effective to remain still, keeping your hands at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel where they are clearly visible through the glass. This simple act of transparency goes a long way in lowering the atmospheric tension of the stop. The officer is approaching a vehicle they know nothing about, and their own nervous system is likely on high alert as well. By presenting a picture of stillness and predictability, you are effectively de-escalating the situation before a single word is spoken. If it is dark outside, turning on your interior dome light is another subtle way to signal that you have nothing to hide and that you are prioritizing the safety of everyone involved. These small, deliberate choices are the foundation of a successful interaction, allowing you to move from a state of reactive fear to a state of proactive awareness. You are not just a driver in this moment. You are an individual exercising a high degree of emotional intelligence to ensure that a routine traffic stop remains just that, routine. Understanding the mechanics of fear can help you dismantle its power over you during a stop. When the brain perceives a threat, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic and complex decision-making, tends to take a backseat to the amygdala, which governs the fight or flight response. This is why people often stammer, forget where their registration is, or accidentally say things they later regret when an officer asks a simple question. By acknowledging this biological reality, you can consciously choose to take slow, deep breaths to re-engage your logical mind. Think of it as a reset button for your brain, allowing you to listen more effectively and respond with clarity rather than defensiveness. The goal is to remain the most composed person on the scene, regardless of the officer's demeanor. If you can maintain this composure, you are better equipped to remember the legal concepts we will discuss and to avoid the traps of high-stress communication. This is especially important during these busy spring months when road construction and increased patrolling can make the environment outside your car feel chaotic and unpredictable. By creating a pocket of calm inside your vehicle, you provide yourself the mental space needed to protect your interests and stay safe. You are setting the stage for a professional exchange where information is traded clearly and where the risk of unnecessary escalation is minimized through your own quiet, steady presence. As the officer reaches your window, the physical and verbal exchange officially begins, marking a transition from internal preparation to active interaction. It is generally advisable to roll your window down all the way, or at least far enough to facilitate a clear conversation and the easy passage of documents, as this signals a lack of concealment and helps lower the officer's initial suspicion. Keep your hands clearly visible on the steering wheel and wait for the officer to speak first, which maintains a structured and predictable environment. When the request for your driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance inevitably comes, resist the urge to immediately reach into your pocket, the center console, or the glove compartment. Instead, this is the perfect moment to utilize a strategy of verbal transparency by narrating your intended actions before you execute them. You might say, in a calm and even tone, that your wallet is in your pocket or that your registration is in the glove box, and then ask for permission to reach for those items. This simple courtesy is not about subservience. It is a tactical de-escalation technique that removes the element of surprise from the officer's perspective. By announcing your movements, you are providing the officer with a sense of control and safety, which often translates into a more professional and less aggressive demeanor on their part. If you have a firearm in the vehicle and live in a jurisdiction that requires you to disclose its presence, or even if you simply choose to do so for safety, this is the time to state its location clearly and keep your hands away from it. The goal is to make the interaction as routine and boring as possible, as a boring stop for an officer is a safe stop, and a safe stop is more likely to conclude without unnecessary conflict or escalation. Maintaining a professional and respectful tone is your most effective tool for managing the temperature of the interaction at the window. Using formal titles such as officer or deputy can go a long way in establishing a business-like atmosphere, which helps distance the situation from personal emotions or ego-driven confrontations. It is important to remember that the side of the road is not the place to litigate the merits of the stop or to argue about whether you were actually speeding or if a taillight was truly out. Engaging in a roadside debate rarely results in an officer changing their mind, and often provides them with more time and information to look for further violations. If you believe the stop is unjustified or that your rights are being infringed upon, the most effective way to handle that is to remain polite and compliant during the physical exchange while mentally noting the details for a later legal challenge in a courtroom. Your primary objective during this phase is to complete the identification process and move the encounter toward a conclusion as efficiently as possible. When handing over your documents, try to ensure they are organized and easy to read. Having your registration and insurance card clipped together or stored in a clear sleeve can prevent a frantic and suspicious-looking search through a cluttered glove box. This level of organization communicates that you are a responsible and prepared driver, which subtly reinforces the idea that you are not a threat or a high-risk individual. The concept of de-escalation is often discussed in terms of what the officer should do, but as a driver, you have an equal ability to influence the trajectory of the encounter through your own behavior. Avoiding sarcasm, dismissive language, or an overly defensive posture can prevent the officer from feeling the need to exert more authority than is necessary. If the officer's tone is aggressive, or if they seem to be baiting you into a confrontation, the best response is a gray rock approach, being as uninteresting and non-reactive as possible. Provide the requested documents, answer basic identifying questions clearly, and avoid volunteering extra information about your day, your destination, or your opinions on local law enforcement. This controlled silence is not an act of hostility, but a protective measure that keeps the focus on the administrative task at hand. By remaining a calm and predictable participant in the process, you are effectively neutralizing many of the triggers that lead to the hard-way scenario the officer might be hinting at. You are showing that you understand the procedure and are willing to facilitate it within the bounds of your duties as a driver, which allows you to retain your dignity and your composure while minimizing the risk of a simple traffic stop spiraling into something far more complex and dangerous. The window is a threshold of communication, and by managing it with precision and poise, you ensure that the interaction remains a professional exchange rather than a personal battle. Once the documents have been exchanged and the initial identification process is complete, the interaction often shifts from an administrative check to an investigative phase. And this is where the most critical decisions regarding your privacy and your rights are typically made. You may find the officer asking seemingly casual questions about where you are coming from, where you are headed, or what you have been doing earlier in the day. While it might feel natural to engage in friendly small talk to appear cooperative and nice, it is important to recognize that these questions are often designed to elicit admissions or to establish a timeline that could potentially be used to justify a more intrusive investigation later. You are generally not legally required to answer questions about your day or your personal business beyond providing the necessary identification and vehicle paperwork. You can choose to decline to answer these investigative questions politely by stating that you are not comfortable discussing your personal itinerary, or by simply saying you prefer to remain silent. This is a high-level concept rooted in the fundamental protection against self-incrimination. And exercising this right does not mean you are being difficult. It means you are being mindful of your legal boundaries and the potential for even innocent statements to be misinterpreted. In some jurisdictions, the law regarding what you must disclose can vary, especially concerning your destination or the presence of specific items in the vehicle. So it is always wise to be aware of your local requirements while maintaining a general policy of brevity and focus on the traffic matter at hand. The conversation often takes a more serious turn if an officer asks for your permission to search your vehicle, a request that might be framed as a way to clear things up, or a suggestion that if you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem with a quick look inside. It is vital to understand that consent is a powerful legal tool that belongs to you. If you give your consent, you are essentially waiving your standard protections against searches, and anything found during that search can be used as evidence regardless of whether the initial stop was minor. You have the legal standing to say, "I do not consent to any searches." Saying these words clearly, calmly, and firmly is perhaps the most significant action you can take to protect your privacy during a roadside encounter. Refusing a search is not an admission of guilt, and it does not, by itself, give the officer the legal grounds to search your car anyway. However, it does preserve your ability to challenge the legality of any subsequent search in a court of law. If the officer decides to proceed with the search despite your refusal, do not physically interfere, block their path, or become combative, as these actions can lead to serious charges like obstruction or resisting an officer. Simply repeat that you do not consent, stay in the area they designate, and observe the process quietly. Your verbal refusal is your primary shield, and it remains effective only if you remain physically compliant with the officer's commands. There are, of course, high-level exceptions to the requirement for consent, such as the plain view doctrine, which allows an officer to seize illegal items or conduct further investigation if something incriminating is clearly visible from their lawful vantage point outside the vehicle. Similarly, if an officer establishes probable cause, a legal standard suggesting that a crime has likely been committed or that evidence of a crime is inside the vehicle, they may have the authority to search without your permission. Because these standards are often complex and subject to specific situational interpretations, the most effective course of action is to always verbalize your lack of consent while remaining physically peaceful. Laws regarding whether an officer can order you and your passengers to exit the vehicle also differ across various states, but generally, such orders are considered lawful directives for the sake of officer safety. When an officer mentions doing things the hard way, they are often attempting to pressure you into a consensual search to avoid the higher legal burden of proving probable cause or obtaining a warrant. By holding your ground on the issue of consent, without becoming hostile or aggressive, you are not making the situation harder. You are simply ensuring that the legal process is followed correctly and that your rights remain intact. This distinction is crucial because it keeps the responsibility for the legality of the encounter on the officer's shoulders, where it belongs, and prevents you from inadvertently complicating your own legal standing through a misunderstanding of the officer's requests. When the tone of a traffic stop shifts from routine to confrontational, particularly if an officer utters the phrase, "We can do this the hard way," you have reached a critical escalation edge where your words and your silence carry equal weight. This phrase is frequently used as a psychological nudge to convince a driver that asserting their rights is a form of resistance that will lead to more severe consequences. But in the eyes of the law, refusing to waive your protections is a standard exercise of citizenship. The hard way often simply refers to the officer having to take the more rigorous legal steps to achieve their objective, such as contacting a supervisor, calling for a canine unit, or seeking a warrant, rather than relying on your voluntary cooperation to bypass those requirements. In these moments, the most powerful response is not anger or argument, but a steady adherence to the principle of silence. You can state clearly that you are not being difficult, but that you are choosing to remain silent and that you wish to speak with an attorney before answering any further questions. This statement is a formal invocation of your constitutional protections, and once it is made, it serves as a marker in the interaction that signals you are aware of the legal boundaries. It is crucial to understand that silence is not an admission of guilt, nor is it a sign of disrespect. It is a fundamental procedural safeguard that prevents the accidental creation of evidence through nervous or poorly phrased responses. The decision to stop speaking is especially important if you feel the situation is becoming tense or if the officer is becoming increasingly insistent on a search or an admission. Many drivers feel an intense pressure to explain themselves or to justify their actions in the hope that the officer will empathize and let them go with a warning. But in reality, once an officer has decided to escalate, your explanations are more likely to be used to build a case against you than to set you free. By choosing silence, you are effectively pausing the investigative momentum and forcing the interaction to rely on objective evidence rather than subjective conversation. This does not mean you should become physically uncooperative. You must still comply with all lawful orders, such as exiting the vehicle if instructed or standing in a specific area. Staying safe means maintaining a non-threatening posture, keeping your hands visible, and avoiding any sudden movements that could be misconstrued as an attempt to flee or to access a weapon. Your goal is to be a factual observer of your own stop, documenting the officer's actions in your memory while providing them with as little verbal material as possible to work with. This disciplined approach ensures that if the matter does eventually end up in front of a judge, the record reflects a driver who was compliant, calm, and firmly within their rights, rather than one who was argumentative or obstructive. As the escalation reaches its peak, perhaps involving a detainment or an actual arrest, the importance of requesting counsel cannot be overstated. This is the moment where you must let the legal system's built-in protections take over. You are not a legal expert, and the roadside is not a venue where you can reasonably expect to win a complex legal debate. By stating that you want to speak with your lawyer, you are invoking a right that exists precisely for these high-pressure situations, providing a barrier between yourself and further interrogation. Even if you are certain you have done nothing wrong, the request for an attorney is a protective measure that ensures any future statements are made under the guidance of a professional who understands the specific nuances of your local laws. This mindset of preservation, preserving your rights, preserving your safety, and preserving your future legal options, is what allows you to navigate the hard way with your dignity intact. You are essentially shifting the battlefield from the unpredictable environment of the street to the structured environment of the legal system, where facts and procedure are the primary currency. By remaining factual in your mind and silent in your speech, you are performing the most effective form of de-escalation possible, transforming a potentially volatile confrontation into a controlled legal event that can be addressed properly by qualified professionals later on. Once the taillights of the cruiser disappear and the immediate pressure of the interaction lifts, your most important work for your legal protection is just beginning. It is natural to want to drive away as quickly as possible to put the stressful event behind you. But the most effective thing you can do is stay parked for a few extra minutes to capture the details while they are fresh. Pull out a notepad or use a voice memo app on your phone to record a chronological account of the entire encounter. Start with the basics: the time of day, the exact location, the weather conditions, and the reason the officer gave for pulling you over. If you were able to see the officer's name or badge number, record those immediately, along with any identifying markings on the patrol vehicle. Pay close attention to the specific language used during the stop. If the officer made statements like, "We can do this the hard way," or pressured you for consent after you had already refused, these details are crucial. A documentation mindset transforms you from a stressed driver into a factual witness of your own experience, ensuring that your version of events is preserved with as much accuracy as possible before the passage of time begins to blur the edges of your memory. This record will be the most valuable tool you can provide to a legal professional should you choose to contest a citation or file a complaint regarding the conduct of the stop. Beyond your own notes, look for objective evidence that can support your account. If your vehicle is equipped with a dashcam, ensure that the footage of the stop is saved and backed up to a secure location as soon as you get home. If the officer cited a mechanical failure, such as a burnt-out headlight or a faulty turn signal, take a clear photograph or video of the vehicle right there on the side of the road, or at the nearest well-lit gas station to document its actual condition at the time of the stop. If there were passengers in your car, ask them to write down what they saw and heard from their perspective, as multiple consistent accounts carry significantly more weight in a legal setting. Remember that the legal system relies on evidence and procedure, not just personal feelings or general claims of unfairness. By systematically gathering this information, you are preparing yourself to navigate the aftermath of the stop with the same composure and precision you used during the interaction itself. This proactive approach ensures that any subsequent legal discussions are rooted in reality rather than a he said, she said argument, providing a much firmer ground for your defense or for the protection of your constitutional rights. It is vital to reiterate that the concepts discussed throughout this series are intended for general educational and informational purposes only, and do not constitute legal advice in any form. Law is a complex and highly specialized field, and the rules governing traffic stops, searches, and seizures can vary dramatically depending on the state, the local jurisdiction, and the specific circumstances of each individual case. What may be a standard procedure in one part of the country could be viewed differently in another, and only a qualified attorney licensed in your area can provide the specific guidance necessary for your situation. Furthermore, viewing this content or following the general strategies mentioned does not establish an attorney-client relationship between you and the creator of this material. The legal system is built on nuances that a general overview cannot fully address, and attempting to handle complex legal matters without professional assistance can lead to unintended and serious consequences. If you find yourself in a situation where you believe your rights have been compromised, or if you are facing significant legal penalties, you should immediately seek out and consult with a qualified local attorney who can review the facts of your case and offer professional counsel. Your safety and your legal standing are paramount. And while being informed is a critical first step, it is never a substitute for the expertise of a legal professional who is trained to navigate the intricacies of the law on your behalf. Taking the time to verify local statutes and securing professional representation is the only way to ensure that your rights are fully defended within the specific legal landscape where you live and drive.